the term I've come up with, a vegan consequentialist, is completely pseudo-intellectual. But ultimately, what I've derived it to mean, in my own terminology, appropriating philosophy jargon, is that the killing and torture of animals for food is morally indefensible, given that we are able to survive without it, and that on a societal level and on a species level, with the ability to evolve beyond eating meat and inhumanely farmed vegetarian animal products, that we have an obligation as a society to do so. And as a result, because basically at our level of consumption, all animal products are factory farmed, including milk, eggs that say they're organic, free-range eggs. It's all bullshit. They can basically tell you anything, and it can be a lie, because the watchdog groups are made to be toothless, because if the watchdog groups had power, they would tank various massive sectors. So it's basically an inconvenient truth where it's like, yeah, factory farming's terrible, but it's very important for society, so we're just not going to do anything about it. So in my personal ethical view, unless financial or physical ability is a concern, or physical health is a concern, you have an obligation not to endorse the torture, exploitation, and murder of animals. Because I do believe that animals deserve protection. It always bothered me when people abuse their pets. Most people are bothered by pet abuse, and that is a belief that is completely inconsistent with the farming and exploitation and murder of animals for food. Because the reason pet abuse is wrong is that it is unnecessary harm perpetrated on animals, and all animal farmed food is unnecessary harm perpetrated on animals. And so in order to be consistent in my beliefs and not be a hypocrite, I have to be against eating meat, I have to be against eating dairy, against eating eggs, or specifically against supporting the torture and murder of animals. So the thing about veganism is that it is a super minority ethical belief in its pure form, which is like the view of veganism is that our societal view on animal rights is inconsistent. That we protect some animals and not others, and we do not have proper ethical foundations for deciding what we do. And the problem is that the deck is stacked against us, that most people don't do this ethical, hard work, heavy lifting, and they're extremely resistant to be told that this entire portion of their life and culture is completely morally indefensible. They're very resistant to that view. And so one of the most important parts of veganism, and for any minority political group that is trying to attack a serious social inequity, the most important thing is optics. Optics, 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 optics. I think there's a ContraPoints video about the aesthetic, and how the right is so good at using the aesthetic to their advantage, but the left is not so good at it. And that really came out in this conversation. And I think this conversation is kind of an analog for the problem that the left has in general in any political conversation. But any group that considers itself to be a moral minority. So what this caller did was he goaded Sam into a thought experiment after Sam admitted he doesn't deal in morality. But he basically tried to like strong arm the thought experiment in. What the caller was trying to do was create a dialogue tree. After an admittance from Sam Seder that he wasn't going to engage in an ethical discussion, in a discussion of ethics. So like, it's such poor optics for someone to do that, because this guy has debated people like Ask Yourself, like I think Ask Yourself, maybe spoken to Vegan Gains, but also argued with Destiny. But Destiny engages in philosophical conversations. He creates arguments that are based very heavily on certain principles of epistemology, on on certain principles of logic and rational arguing, and inconsistencies are very important to him. So you are set up for that conversation. Why you would try to have that same conversation about thought experiments and moral and intellectual consistency with someone like Sam Seder, who's a political commentator, yes, extremely well informed, and at the surface level argues for all the right things, because he has a very well formed, he has a morality that I consider to be very admirable. But it's clear that he has not informed that morality by basically constructing an ethical framework. He hasn't grounded his moral axioms. He believes these things because he grew up in a progressive society that believes these things. That's how I believe most of the things I believe. It just so happens that when I do some of the ethical heavy lifting, which I have not completely done, but I'm getting further and further into philosophy and understanding things like, starting to understand things like metaethics. That's what led me to be vegan, completely against any kind of cultural backing. But you're trying to engage in thought experiments with somebody who is not even remotely interested yet in having a philosophical conversation with you. Which is just really stupid. And it's terrible optics for the vegan community. And then he did the same thing where he basically, this caller equated animal killing to genocide. Without creating any kind of comparative viability between animals and humans as deserving of moral consideration. It doesn't do anything. It except offend people, because you are talking to a Jewish American and using Holocaust terminology to talk about the killing of animals. Like, your entire argument is designed to root people in their views. It is terrible, terrible optics. In my opinion, and I am Monday morning quarterbacking and also armchair quarterbacking, in my opinion, the best way to start the conversation would be to say, so Sam Seder said, I derive my views from what society thinks around me, and the community I grew up in has these values, and I have these values. The counter argument to that would be, okay, don't you believe that society should derive its values from some form of ethics, from some kind of ethical framework? To which I hope that the answer would be yes, that ethics should not simply be societally circular, that it shouldn't just be, passed from from parent onto child to parent onto child to parent onto child. There should be some form of some other basic moral conviction that informs these so that we can continue to develop ourselves morally. And so the answer to that would be yes, society ought to have some kind of ethical framework informing its morality. And then the question would be, wouldn't it then be the responsibility of the citizens, especially those with a platform, wouldn't it be their responsibility to hold society accountable to the foundations of its ethical framework? And then I believe the answer would probably be, something like, in theory, yes, but I don't feel like that's my obligation personally. But you're opening up the door to say, it is morally virtuous for you to care about these things. And it opens the door to say, maybe I should care about these things. Maybe I should examine my morality. And there is an advantage of confirmation bias for the left, where it is easier for us to construct ethical frameworks because our values and our ideology is already very, very heavily in tandem with our politics. That anyone who constructs a moral system based on empathy, based on the valuation of sentience, is very likely to support left politics. And thus, people who support left politics have an easier time pursuing. It's a cognitive bias, and it's a fallacy. It's fallacious, and it's probably not a good process. But it does make it convenient for leftists who want other leftists to explore ethics to see everyone who has explored ethics basically become a socialist. to say, oh, okay, well, maybe this won't mess up my entire life. Maybe this won't ruin my relationship with my family, because it won't change the way that I interact with politics on a daily level. So I think the first step is just to say, listen, as a member of society, it is a good idea for you to hold society accountable, because if society is operating from an ethical framework, but operating inconsistently, and that operation should be improved, then it is the job of the people within it to actually hold it accountable to that. And I think that's the strongest argument for encouraging people who have, I guess, what you might say, preference-based views on morality, or I guess subjectivist views, as this person said. Basically saying you can't just take your morals from society. Your morals also have to influence society, because that's the only way that we evolve morally. Of course, I don't have much of a background in philosophy, to be fair. Many vegans don't. But that seemed like the more convincing way to go about the argument.